I'd like to return to something that you mentioned a few minutes ago. You were talking about scientism, and scientism, I think you've defined it elsewhere as the belief that science is all the real knowledge there is. And beyond the sorts of arguments that you just laid out that are aimed against the structure of what I'll refer to as the scientist worldview, I'm wondering if you see it as also having any particularly pernicious negative social or cultural consequences, the adoption of this sort of outlook.
Okay, well, so I would call it the scientistic worldview.
Okay,
The
that's a good way of
scientist
putting
means
it.
someone like me, but that's a small point. So I think, yeah, it is pernicious in lots of ways, because it has important impacts on some of the other disciplines, and also because it has important impacts on science itself. So if scientism is false, as I believe it is, then when people start to say, well, we must follow the science, what that is actually doing is that it's kind of a self-promotional deception. When we make political decisions, and people say we're going to make this on the basis of the science, of course, I believe they should take account of what we know from the natural sciences about the way the world works. And that's very important. But oftentimes, what they're really doing is kind of publicity or actually false advertising. So we're all familiar with the kinds of adverts which say, Wizzo washing powder works better because it's scientifically developed. Okay, that is self-promotion. Okay, and so scientism can lead to a reliance on that kind of argument, whereas in fact sociological decisions, political decisions, need to be made on all sorts of bases in addition to science, and sociological or economic or other related types of discipline are very important, but they're not like natural science. They're not as definitive as natural sciences, and people know that, they sense that. And as a result, when people hear arguments along the lines of, Wizzo washing powder, they're naturally suspicious. And so actually the scientific move, which breeds this kind of false advertising, can actually hurt science itself, because it puts science in a position that it's unable to fulfill, and thereby raises doubts about science in the minds of common people who don't understand what is truly science and what is unknown or uncertain or a different type of analysis from the analyses of science. So I would argue that since you asked me whether scientism is pernicious, I would say that's an example of the ways in which it can be, and often is, pernicious. It basically can alienate people from true scientific knowledge, because it's often being science language is being misused to describe far less scientific knowledge than the natural sciences really addresses. That's one. I mean, the fact that most disciplines are in the process of rebranding themselves as something kind of science, okay, is actually an evidence of scientism at work. So sociology, which is the study of societies, is very important. But actually, what it now calls itself is social science. Well, yeah, it's a very important discipline. There are ways in which sociologists go about gathering the data and trying to interpret it, which pursued in a rigorous and logical way are very important. But they're actually not like how we find out about the world in natural science. They're not based on reproducible, by and large, on reproducible experiments, because they're about whole societies. And you can never isolate all of the influences in such a way that you can do what are truly reproducible experiments. So I think that this trend to call, for example, politics political science is an example of scientism at work, where people are trying to catch the coattails of natural science, which has been tremendously successful in producing very profound and reliable knowledge, and apply it to other disciplines. That doesn't mean to say I don't think political scientists, as they call themselves, know something. They do. They know a lot. And politics is very important, and the study of politics is very important, and I want them to go ahead and do it. I just think that it's a mistake if they think they're producing, kinds of the laws of politics.
I'm going to put myself in the shoes or don the hat of the scientism advocate for a moment. And I'm wondering because I know that you've done some thinking about past religious scientists and their worldviews, but am I right that what would at first appear to be a positive consequence of the scientistic worldview, that maybe like the advances in, say, medical technology in the past 50 years are, in your view, they're not necessarily a product of scientism per se, in the sense that religiously minded scientists like yourself engender serious advances in physics and technology without adhering to this ostensibly rigid and narrow worldview?
Yeah, I think that more or less captures it. I would make the case a bit more strongly than that, and I would say that if you look at the people who were the founders of modern science as we now know it, of the scientific revolution, if you like to put it like that, they were predominantly Christians, and I don't think that's a coincidence. I think it's a consequence, or at least it is a situation in which the progress and the fruitful birth of science was able to take place in a society dominated by Christian worldview, by the worldview of an orderly, created universe, and it didn't take place in some other worldviews, and that I think actually there's a deep connection between Christianity and science in that respect. Of course, even though scientists were predominantly Christians for the first 100 or even maybe 200 years, it's not the case that most scientists are Christians now, although actually, if you were to look at the academy and ask the question, of, let's say, university professors, who are the people who are most likely to believe in God, and who are the people who are least likely to believe in God, you might think that if science and Christianity were incompatible, as is often thought, that the answer is that scientists would be the least likely to believe in God. But actually, the statistics and my own personal observations make it clear that that's false. In fact, engineers and scientists are substantially, let's say, more likely to believe in God, people in university positions, than people in the sociology and the humanities. That's simply what the statistics show. So it's actually false to think and speak as if, you've got a choice. You can either be a scientist or believe in science, or you can believe in God. I mean, that's the kind of crass kind of contrast that's often drawn. So it's not true, and it's actually, if anything, the other way around. That science and Christianity go together very profitably, even though it's, obviously we live in a world that today isn't so dominated by Christianity as it once was.